Will Surfert wonders whether a useless person like himself can excel without magic at the prestigious, regarded magical academy, with only skills as he fights with monsters in a dungeon. At class, he fails to conjure up a fire, which even makes his professor Edward roast him endlessly, and a wannabe hotshot of the class. Cyan Ulster demonstrates fire magic in his stead, even though nobody asks him to. After class, Cyan and his minions make fun of him, and their classmate Colette defends Will, so they remind her that a useless person like him can never become Magia Vander. Long ago, 5 powerful mages called Magia Vander drove off evil celestial host and cast a seal over the sky to bring peace to the people. So since then, the title has been passed down to the strongest. Will recalls how he and his childhood friend Elfaria once made a promise to watch the sunset together after becoming Magia Vander, but she left him and became the youngest mage ever. Later, he gets scolded by Professor Werkner on going to the dangerous dungeon, but he gives him 2 credit points nonetheless, and reminds him that he has to reach the upper institute first before aiming to become Magia Vander. He also reminds him that he needs points in all 3 fields of writing, spellwork, and praxis, and that he needs 4 more credit points by the weekend if he wishes not to fail in his studies. He also sneakily tells him about the wandering Baskerville on the dungeon's 6th floor, who is worth 4 credit points. So Will rushes to the dungeon to get his points, while Cyan, who is eavesdropping all alone, also goes to the dungeon to beat Will in his game. Cyan's minions get attacked by an ugly-looking, hideous monster in the dungeon, and Will rushes towards the noise when he hears all the commotion. He spots a 10 points worth evil sentinel fighting Cyan and beating the crap out of him like the wuss he is. Somehow he remembers his promise with Elfaria and realizes that he wants to become worthy of her. So rather than just staying back, he steps in just in time to save Cyan from getting butchered, and then starts fighting the sentinel. He attacks him again and again. Meanwhile, Professor Werkner assures Professor Edward that he doesn't have to worry about Cyan and his gang since Will is with them. Will continues to block all of Sentinel's attacks, which shocks Cyan, while the professors look on at the dramatic fight through a magical ball. Werkner declares to Edward that in the world of mages, Will is the only true warrior, just as Will slashes one of Sentinel's limbs and lands a finishing blow with his sword, which kills the monster. The fight stuns Cyan to retardation, and Edward barges out in anger, since he cannot believe strength alone can surpass magic. Later, Will gets his 10 credit points from Werkner. 5 years ago, the students at the academy wonder whether Will would get kicked out since he was only a bait to lure Elfaria into the academy, and so the headmaster Cauldron gives him a sword to test him out. He breaks her magic circles, so she lets him stay at the academy. In the present, Werkner informs the class that they can advance to the upper institute to become Magia Vander if they come up with new magic or get 7,200 credit points. He then gives them all supplementary lessons because they are all failures. After class, Colette and Will come across Cyan's friends, boasting to everybody that Cyan defeated the evil sentinel. Cyan also gets heated up when he notices Will, but ultimately he rushes away without doing much. Meanwhile, Edward pleads Cauldron to kick Will out. She explains that his performance is excellent, even if he cannot use magic, but when he doesn't stop yapping, she tells him to give Will a test to expel him or to let him stay. Will stashes away his sword with Colette's magic, and afterwards studies about the history with her in the library. She reminds him that he doesn't have to study much since he's already such a theta, but he argues that he cannot afford to lose any credit point on his writing exam. He starts yapping about how he can understand the battle of dwarves who stood up against strong magic. Edward joins them both and leads Will to the spell hall alone with an excuse that he wants to give him a supplemental lesson on spell work. He then tells him to land a strike on him or else he will get expelled, and then begins attacking him. Cauldron also informs Werkner about Edward's test for Will by showing him the battle magically, and this makes Werkner protest that the battle is highly unjust since Edward has actually reached the tower's top to become Magia Vander, but he was defeated in the process. Will tries to kick Edward, but fails due to his strong defense, and Edward in return rains down magical fire on him, which almost gets him killed. Meanwhile, Will's cat Kiki makes its way to the cupboard where Will's sword is stashed and somehow communicates to Colette that Will is in trouble, so Colette hurries to take out the sword. Edward yaps endlessly about the mightiness of Magia Vander and asks Will about his reason to aim so high, so Will replies that he wants to join the person whom he loves. This triggers Edward and he starts going off about how pathetic his ambitions are. Meanwhile, Colette rushes to the scene and throws Will's sword at him. Edward attacks him with fire again, but despite trembling like a wuss, Will dodges all his attacks and attacks him from his blind spot. He breaks through his shield and slashes his cheek with his sword, bringing their battle to an end. Edward then gives him 5 credit points and leaves in a hurry, while Cauldron applauds at Will's victory. In the past, as Elpharia starts her journey towards the tower, Will reminds her of their promise and declares that he will join her soon. In the present, Will delivers newspapers to the houses in the morning as a part of his job and comes across the news that the Upper Institute on Elpharia's instructions has issued an order to the entire academy. Will then rushes to his roommate Rosti and asks him to make magical items for his journey to collect Frostwalker ice cores. Rosti gives him some items as he is an artificer and tells him to take care of himself. Will makes his way to the dungeon's 4th floor, where he comes across a number of students already in the process of collecting the ice cores. He even sees Scion acting all hormonal, which is his usual. He then goes to a deeper area to find more ice cores where he comes across 3 ugly-looking monsters attacking a girl. He kills the monsters, becoming the hero of the day, and the girl introduces herself as Iris. In class, Werkner tells the class that they can advance to the Upper Institute if they come up with new magic, just like Elpharia, who is one of the greatest mages ever. Colette's friend teases her and calls her jealous because of Elpharia. In the dungeon, Will asks Iris whether she's fine with walking around a useless loser like him, and she tells him that he saved her life. Will recalls how the world doesn't know about the actual sky, since Magia Vander's magic is cloaking the sky through the ultimate barrier. Iris informs him that Elpharia once saved her life in the dungeon, and since then, she has been her dedicated groupie. She starts yapping while Will notices ice dust around him, which makes him realize that a strong Frostwalker must be near them. She questions his analysis, but soon an ugly-looking ice block attacks him, and she identifies him as Frost Rex, who is worth 6 credit points and is the highest form of Frostwalker. Iris warns Will not to engage in fighting, since only long-range magical attacks work on Frost Rex, but since Will's Superman, he attacks the monster head-on. He dodges all its attacks and throws the magical artifice over it. He then begins maneuvers around him to wrap the artifice around the monster's body, while also dodging all his attacks. Since a Frost Rex's weak point is fire or explosive attacks, once he wraps the cord around him, he triggers the cord so that fire spreads through it and the magical item explodes. The explosion takes down the Frost Rex with it and Iris. Watching all of this wonders who should she report about Will's powers. Later at the Wizard's Tower, Iris approaches a council room where all Magia Vander are seated and tells them that to find someone useful for Magia Vander. Since she came across Will in the dungeon, she recommends him for a position in the tower, but most of the Magia Vander instantly refuse, and the redhead Carriot tells them they can decide once they have seen the results of the Grand Magical Festival. After they all leave, Elpharia comments that she is waiting for Will. The next day, during a test, Scion and Colette easily defeat the golems, but Will is defeated thanks to his useless main character ability called Zero Abilities. The 3rd and 2nd ranked in points, Lehana and Wignall easily defeat the golems, but their limelight is stolen by the person with the highest points named Julius, who freezes a number of golems with a single spell. Will thinks about how the three have more than 10,000 points, while he doesn't even have enough to graduate, but Julius disturbs his enlightenment by telling him to get out of his sight before walking away. During lunch, Colette tries to convince Will to join the upcoming Grand Magic Festival so he can get scouted because he doesn't have any other chance to go to the Upper Institute. She explains how the current Magi of Vander are leading 4 separate factions, and getting chosen by any one of them can make them a tower member. Will objects that he will need to stand out to be selected and roasts himself by saying that a useless person like him shouldn't try to stand out, which was proven during the last festival 2 years ago. Colette's yapping continues for a while until she notices a barrier behind the lockers and uses the most useful character, Kiki, to break it. They find a hidden stairway which leads to an underground gambling den where they encounter Cyan, who starts by acting tough, but Colette threatens him to talk normally. Will questions why Cyan is here even though he isn't gambling, and Cyan's lackeys end up revealing that he just came to check how much his betting odds are compared to the top 3, so Cyan leaves out of embarrassment. Later, Will goes to do his night shift at a dwarven bar run by Gina, and he gets along with all the dwarves. Will's roommate named Rosti also helps him because one of the staff quit, leaving them shorthanded, and he asks Will why he works at a dwarven bar even though they pay less. So Will reveals that he likes the dwarves a lot because they accepted him very warmly. Just then, Ice Prince Julius enters the bar while dissing all the dwarves along with Will by calling them both useless, which is actually only true for Will. Julius degrades the dwarves by saying that they escaped from their own world, which was destroyed by the High Celestial, and are living in the country thanks to other people's graces, because of which they cannot go against any mage. Rosti serves the trashy trio their food, but they insult the food along with the dwarves, so Will steps forward and tells them to apologize. Julius kicks the food away, and Will knocks out the 2 lackeys in the blink of an eye, which spills the beer on Julius. He gets angry and starts attacking Will, who gets pinned to the wall. Julius is shocked to see that Will doesn't show any sign of fear, so he decides to defeat Will during the Grand Magic Festival. Will breaks away from the ice and agrees to join the festival, but Julius will have to apologize to the dwarves if Will wins. A few days later, the Grand Magic Festival finally begins after a boring speech by Cauldron, and Lahana wins the first event known as Sky Race for the 2nd time in a row. Meanwhile, Cyan recalls how Colette asked him to join her team for the main event known as Crown Attack, and he happily goes to the waiting room while thinking that she finally realized how he is better than Will, which isn't false. His happiness is short-lived as he finds Will in the waiting room too, and Colette explains that they needed him to fulfill the requirement of 21,000 credits to join the Crown Attack. Cyan starts yapping about why he should help Will, but notices that Will is only focused on Julius, which makes him serious. The elves yap for a while just to create the stage for the Crown Attack around the stadium, where the contestants start from around the stadium and must get to the crown first after clearing several hurdles to win. Werkner is shocked to see Will participating and tries to convince him to give up, but he doesn't listen. The Crown Attack begins, and the first hurdle is a golem army which Will defeats easily using a gauntlet created by Colette's magic. All the spectators are shocked, and Will's team reach the second hurdle where several cubes shoot spikes at them. Will hits the ground into the air to create a wall against the spikes, and this is how the Great Wall of China was created. Colette summons several swords which Will uses as darts to shoot down the cubes, and they continue advancing towards the crown. Julius decides to rush forward all alone after seeing that Will is in the lead, and Will's team reaches the last hurdle called Enchanted Woods. He encounters a chain circle trap in the beginning, but redirects all the spells to attack each other and plans to ambush Julius. But his plan fails as Julius arrives before them somehow. He attacks Will as soon as he arrives, but their fight is disturbed by Cyan, who starts casting a high-level magic. Colette manages to create a wall at the last moment, which helps Will survive the blast, but it ruins the terrain around them. Cyan tells Julius to stay away so he can fight Will, and Will tries to convince Cyan to stop his stupid antics, but Cyan could care less. Colette is about to help Will, but Julius stops her by creating a wall that separates the two so he can fight Colette. Cyan continues to throw flames at Will, which knocks his sword away as Will tries to convince Cyan to stop fighting. Cyan tells him to keep his mouth shut and fight, which probably hurts Will's ego as he obediently picks up the sword again. Cyan recalls how Will was worthless from the start, so he tried to help him, but Will rejected his offer as he only had eyes for the tower. Cyan thinks about how he hated Will since that moment, and he continues to shoot fireballs at Will, who continues to only defend. Cyan shouts at him to fight properly, but Goody Two-Shoes says that they're on the same team. Meanwhile, all the spectators are shocked at the friendly fire. The scouts discuss how Cyan just ruined his own image, and Iris sits next to Rosti to cheer for Will. Rosti mentions how so many people are obsessed with Will and says that he loves Will more than anything, which puts him into the sus list. On the other side, Colette tries to fight against Julius, but he blows up one of the traps under her feet, and the spectators notice that there are many Julius all over the map. Wagnall, however, easily defeats one of the Julius, who turns into ice after getting defeated, which reveals that the Julius are just ice clones. The elves watching the match give Wagnall a harsh subpar rating, while Will wonders why Cyan is so obsessed with him. He recalls his own possible villain origin story and wonders why he was bullied for no reason. He thinks about how he just wanted to be left alone and wanted to go to Elpharia. Cyan summons a Flacon Guardian out of nowhere, which attacks Will, who manages to cut a wing before rushing to attack Cyan. The Falcon recovers instantly and prevents Will from getting close to Cyan. The scouts from the Fire faction find Cyan very promising and discuss how Cyan must have had a sudden breakthrough. Meanwhile, Will and Cyan start arguing like longtime lovers, and Will says that he does want to get back at Cyan for bullying him so much, but he currently has to defeat Julius. This infuriates Cyan, who questions why Will looks everywhere else but him and only ignores him. Will is surprised that this was how Cyan saw him all along, and all his actions were to gain Will's attention, so he decides to properly fight Cyan for his acknowledgement. Cyan summons wide-scale magic along with an attack from the Guardian, but Will manages to dodge all the attacks before killing the Guardian and is about to attack Cyan, but Colette interrupts them. She says that she defeated Julius, who turned out to be a clone, while the innocent Cyan freaks out over how exposed she is. Colette tells Will to go defeat Julius, so Will obediently runs away, leaving behind the heartbroken Cyan. Julius enters the stadium with his squad and is about to take the crown, but Will jumps into the stadium with a perfect landing. He challenges Julius to a fight, and they have an epic stare down along with Julius's ugly smile. Meanwhile, Elpharia gets a report from her assistant Sarissa about the potential candidates that the scouts have recommended, and Sarissa explains that Julius is the best candidate they have found. She even says that Julius has the potential to be Elpharia's successor, and Elpharia says that it might be possible if everything written on the report is true. Will tells Julius that he has no intentions of losing until Julius apologizes to the dwarves and call him a yapper with no talent. He suddenly creates fog in the whole arena, and Will guesses that the three plan to surround him, so he uses the attacks to find Julius's location, but he gets blown away by another ice spike. Everyone is shocked to see that there are a number of Juliuses in the arena, and Will realizes that these are not simple clones. Julius reveals that the clones also explode, and the one nearest to Will explodes, freezing him in place. Everyone is still stuck at the fact that Julius is using Arsvice from the 12 magic spells of Elpharia, known as Elglas Frost. Will questions how he is using Elpharia's magic, and Julius replies that it's called natural talent. This angers Will, who breaks out of the ice, but is only able to defend against the continuous attacks from the ice clones. The clones suddenly stop attacking out of nowhere, and three join together to trap Will into a cage. Will is unable to break out of it, and Julius summons a giant ice boulder which crushes Will. Julius assumes his victory and begins bragging by announcing himself as Elfaria's successor, but the ice boulder breaks apart as Will walks out of it. He thanks Julius for helping him cool off, which annoys Julius and his lackeys, so they attack Will, but he suddenly appears behind the two lackeys before knocking them out. The ice clones start breaking apart, and Will reveals that he was controlling the clones with his teammates' help. Simultaneously, Elfaria tells Sarissa that she doesn't wish for a successor, instead she is waiting for a lone sword. Back at the arena, Will throws shade at Julius Caesar's vice by calling it imperfect, and Julius summons 4 more clones again while thinking about how he can only use 4 clones without the help of his teammates. Will easily defends against the attacks and strikes at the real Julius, which shocks him. Will explains how there is a temperature difference between the clones and the real Julius. He explains that he and Elfaria grew up together and he always admired her magic, that's why he knows it the most. Julius refuses to accept that a no-talent like Will knows ice magic better than him as he falls to the ground, and Will delivers the final heartbreaking blow by revealing that Elfaria created Ars Weiss when she was 2 years old. Julius goes through an emotional breakdown and uses it to summon 8 clones, but only has low control over them. He begins attacking Will, but Will slays down all the clones one by one in an epic hunt and punches Julius away, finally defeating him. The victory is short-lived as Wignall grabs the crown politely, winning the crown attack, but nonetheless Will remains happy at the fact that he defeated Julius. After the Magic Festival, Will and Colette go back to the Dwarf Tavern to celebrate. Even Professor Werkner is present there. He thanks the dwarves for taking care of Will all this time. Julius is on plate duty as his punishment for his stupidity. While Will puts on a good show at the festival, he didn't end up winning the crown attack, so no scouts approached him. The next day at school, everyone wants a piece of Will. Since the all-student praxis is coming up, they want to form a party with him now that they know what he is capable of. Even the gold diggers are crawling to him to try and get him on their party. Will had been so starved of friendship that he just gets excited to have people near him. Colette sees that she is in danger of losing her man to these birds, so she grabs Will and tells him that he had plans to go shopping with her. The girl finally takes charge and shows her riz. She goes bright red at night, thinking about what she did today. The next day, she wears the cutest outfit she has and waits for Will at the mall. Once Will gets there, he compliments Colette and she gets flustered. But as they are about to go on, Rosti comes and joins them. Colette wonders who invited this guy. Rosti introduces himself as Will's roommate and drags Will away as soon as he introduces himself. He turns around and starts making faces at Colette. This goes on for the entire day, and Will, being the naive and oblivious person he is, doesn't suspect a single thing for the whole day. Imagine being so fine that you pull 2 genders who are very attractive. After they all get together on the bench, Colette finally speaks up to Rosti. Rosti first asks Will to leave before locking horns. While that goes on, Will is approached by another girl who is none other than the Lyanna herself. Lyanna leads him to a room on campus, and in there are Wignall, Julius, and Cyan. Will realizes this is a great opportunity to advance further, so he agrees. He meets up with Colette and Rosti, who had been looking for him, and explains what happened. The next day, the all-student praxis begins, a very important event because a student could theoretically gather all their praxis points from it. The professors take extra caution to make sure the students are safe this year. After the teachers lets the students know what to do and what not to do, they began the all-student praxis. Right away, the gang is thrown into the thick of it. Once their party lands, they get ambushed by a horde of ants, but as Will prepared to take them out, Wignall stops him and lets Lyanna handle it instead. Lyanna uses lightning magic, and since she specializes in close quarters combat, it is very powerful. Since Will can't use the simple spell called Search that mages use to detect monsters, he falls behind the others a lot. They get to the monsters quicker, and he now starts to seem like a hindrance to them. He doesn't want it to get to him, so he tries hyping himself up, but the others still continue to burn through the monsters without him. After a while, they come to a spot to rest and revise their plan. Lihana suggests that they head straight for floor 10 to slay the floor keeper, as it's worth 110 credits. As soon as they go to the 10th floor, they all notice that something is off. Will especially notices that the monster corpses that surround them were killed by brute force, not magic. With that in mind, they proceeded cautiously, but nothing could have prepared them for what came next. They stumble upon the corpse of the floor keeper that they came to defeat, which was torn to shreds. All of them. Immediately use search, but the spell doesn't show anything. As there are bigger monsters who can slip through search, they unfortunately end up facing one such monster, the Grand Evil Duke. Even the name sounds scary, but it looks worse than its name. Will notices the nightmare fuel first, but it doesn't mean anything as the Duke jumps down and slams Wignall into the wall. And as the rest of them try casting spells to attack, it breaks the ground and sends them all to the lower levels. Will and Wignall get split up from the rest after he saved Wignall from a free fall. Lihana ends up with Colette and Scion with Julius. When Wignall comes to, Will immediately stretches his hand to help him with his broken arm, but Wignall slaps him back. He proudly retorts that the elves only allow those they deem worthy to touch them. Will hands him the first aid kit, and he applies it himself. Once he's finished, they keep moving, but Wignall gets too anxious, so he keeps using search at the slightest sound like a lil elf wuss. Will tells him not to, and even makes a plan on how often he should use it. Wignall is in awe of how calm and collected Will is such a dire situation. Will explains that it was his experience in the dungeon that's helping him stay calm. Just then, a bunch of monsters come to ambush them. Will takes the two in front, and Wignall takes the one behind. He blows it away, but in reality, the monster slips through. Wignall gets confused about what to do, and he tries hiding himself using illusion magic. But the monsters are blind, so illusions don't work on them. Just isn't the stuck-up prince's day, but luckily, Will comes along and slashes the monster open before it can hit Wignall. Wignall gets down in the dumps about what just happened. Will tries gassing him up, saying that he's a great mage, and they'll have a plan next time, but Wignall suddenly sinks into depression and tells him that he's actually a failure. Wignall opens to Will about how, in the past, he was the laggard of the elf race. All the other elves ascended the tower before they even graduated, and he was the only one left. He says that Lihana is in a similar situation as she witnessed a first year like herself advance up the tower when they were much younger. And ever since then, she knew she couldn't measure up to the actual talents. Wignall explains his tragic past about how he fell in love with an elf he was raised with. But because she had way more magic potential than him, she went on to become their queen and left Wignall behind. Bro really had it rough. Will hears his story and lets out a sigh of relief. He is glad that he can finally relate to Wignall, and because he wasn't the only one struggling. He then makes a promise on the spot to Wignall that he'd protect him until he could stand on his own feet. Suddenly, Kiki, the cat familiar, notices something. Wignall uses search, but it doesn't pick up anything. Will uses his own senses to judge that the dungeon was giving birth to new monsters. As soon as Will sees the kind of monsters being created, he immediately destroys the pod releasing them. But by then, 3 were already born. Will says that physical attacks are useless on them, and they are resistant to most forms of magic, as the only way to defeat them is with elf magic. Will turns to Wignall and asks for his help, but Wignall can't bring himself out of his despair at being the water boy of the elves. Extremely bad time to be having performance issues, but Will tells him he'll protect him regardless, and goes off alone to fight the monsters. Seeing Will fight off the monsters without making any progress, Wignall tries using his magic again, but it doesn't work. Just as he is about to give up and welcome the Grim Reaper, Will jumps in front of the beams of fire and blocks it with the help of Kiki. This time, Wignall decides to stop being a wuss and trust Will. He overcomes his despair and finally takes down the flame monsters with his magic, But he doesn't stop there. He bows his head and finally acknowledges Will as a worthy fighter. They gather their things and head for another area. Elsewhere, Sion and Julius butt heads over rationing water. Their argument is interrupted, however, by a horde of evil sentinels. Sion immediately steps up to defeat them, probably trying to redeem himself from the last time he almost got killed by one. By the time they were done killing the sentinels, Will and Wignall arrive at the scene. Once Will finds out that the girls weren't with them, he starts to search for them. But we see that the girls are already face to face with their potential death at the hands of a headless man, one that hadn't been seen before. As the headless man grows excited to kill all the kids, his companion drags him away. As he gets dragged away, the headless man decides to summon the evil Grand Duke at the spot to kill them instead. The evil Grand Duke gets on demon time, and as soon as he jumps through the magic gates created by the headless man, he starts blasting everyone to bits. Will makes the genius call and tells everyone to fall back into a small opening. Wignall tries to act brave and block the evil Grand Duke's path to them, but the evil Grand Duke rips his magic apart instantly. Will comes to his rescue though, like always, and gets him away safely. W mans, saving his bro and keeping his word. While they were hiding, they scout the area and notice that there are evil sentinels on the lookout, so they have no way out. Everyone tries thinking of a solution, but it all ends in despair. So once again, Will has to be the father that stepped up and suggests that they fight, even saying he has a plan that could take down the evil Grand Duke. Wignall is all in, as well as the ladies and Sion. Only Julius keeps arguing and whining about everything like typical. Will knows how to deal with it. He just tells Julius that he is the most important piece of the plan, and suddenly he gets in on it like a loser. As a little bonus, Will tells him a secret about Elfaria's special spell. After that, they commence the plan. Julius starts his casting, and the evil Grand Duke begins breaking the clones. After a few clones break, Will orders Sion, Colette, and Wignall to attack the evil Grand Duke. Their attacks hold it in place long enough for Julius to get his attack in, but it isn't enough. Lyanna rushes in to deal a powerful blow against it, but the evil Grand Duke has a barrier up to shield against magic attacks. Will goes in to grab Lyanna out of the way, but the evil Grand Duke fired a beam and destroyed his goggles. The rest of the gang saves Will and Lyanna, but Will is in bad shape. Lyanna and Wignall go back out to take on the evil Grand Duke, but Will can't move. His hands start shaking as the goggles Elfie gave him as a final gift get destroyed. He asks Sion to punch him so he can stop trembling. Sion obliges like a true servant, but he starts ranting about all his personal problems as if he is the MC. After a few punches, Will stops Sion, smiles, and gets back on his feet to continue attacking. He gets extremely scared without the goggles, but he pushes that fear aside for the sake of helping the gang get through the nightmare. He begins thinking about a way forward, and then it hits him. It is both wand and sword that are needed, so he asks Sion to throw a spell at him, which he does without question. This time, Will's sword devours the magic and becomes a flame sword. His eyes go red, and he is suddenly filled with immense power. He lunges at the evil Grand Duke, and with one very clean strike, he splits it in half like butter. Just like that, Will takes down this monster by almost all by himself. Their celebrations are cut short, because as soon as the evil Grand Duke perishes, a horde of evil sentinels and evil guards come rushing in to finish off the gang. All out of strength, especially Will, Julius screams as his death draws near. But just then, multiple beams of light appear. Will looks to find the person who cast it and sees that the Light Sovereign himself, Aaron Oldking, deployed it. The gang yells out in excitement after seeing who their savior is. Shortly after, they all bow their heads in reverence to him. Will is more focused on the short boy beside the Light Sovereign. The boy comes down and looks at Will like he was familiar. He asks for Will's name. He then introduces himself as Finn. And with that, the all-student praxis comes to a wild and unexpected end. Afterwards, 11 of the Academy's professors are reported killed, but no student dies thanks to the surviving teachers. The school puts out rewards for information on the two men parading the dungeon. Elsewhere on campus, our heroes recover from their fierce battle. They can't seem to figure out who those two shady men were. Lihana points out that even though they were up against those impossible odds, they still came out alive. She thanks them for being such amazing team members, and even pats herself on the back for forming the team. All that honorable talk takes the last of her energy, because as soon as she finishes talking, her stomach grumbles loudly. Colette gives her a slice of an apple, then another, until she finishes the whole thing. After trying to plead her case about not being a glutton, Lihana goes back to talking about their expedition. This time, she gives Will his due credit for helping them defeat the evil Grand Duke, but Will gets modest and doesn't claim it. Wignall talks about the short kid Finn and says that Finn is part of a tribe who, even though can't use magic, have helped countless sorcerers go deep into the dungeon. He continues that it's literally impossible to go to the deeper floors without them, explaining why the greatest sovereign would need one, besides that the old man might be a disgusting pervert. Later that night, Finn goes to see the headmistress. He delivers her a weapon called the Mage Killer, and they discuss about what or who could have made it, with Finn choosing to leave it with her. Once that's done, Finn jumps on her table with a straight, menacing face and asks why she didn't tell him about Will sooner. She explains that he was aiming to be a sword. Finn strangely accepts it, and not wanting to talk further, he leaves, but not before telling her that he'll be observing him. The next day, Will goes back to practicing with his sword. Suddenly, Cyan jumps down to challenge him. Will hesitates, but a promise is a promise, so he draws his sword and faces him. A few days later, Werkner gives the students a makeup exam in place of the all-night student praxis. As all of Will's preparation has led him to this moment, he opens his booklet and begins the exam that will determine his future.